I think we had two more ideas that we had before that we had worked on actually was only two of the tunes. One was Highway with the Hell. Well, folks have been asking me about guitar players for years. Who was the top one? Who took the fastest? Who had the biggest sound? I never understood how to answer that genuinely. When I was young, I wasn't sitting around thinking about technique. I didn't know half the stuff people now talk about. I didn't know what someone's setup was or what strings they were utilizing, all that stuff. You hear a record and it either got you or it didn't. And that was about it. There was constantly music in the house. There were older brothers around, so albums were always coming up someplace. Rhythm and blues. Blues records. Rock and roll records. And you'd hear something from another room and just freeze. Who's that? That was something I did a lot. And the funny thing is, after all these years I still listen to many of the same people. I can put on an old Muddy Waters record I've heard God knows how many times and still enjoy it. Same with Chuck Berry. You think you know every little sound that's coming, and then all of a sudden you hear something in the guitar that you hadn't heard before. I like that kind of thing. Nothing too slick, nothing trying too hard to impress you, just somebody getting hold of a song and making the bloody thing move. There were musicians that made me want to pick up the guitar. Some of the others taught me that you didn't need 1,000 notes to make people listen. Sometimes a small lick would do. And then of course there was someone much nearer to me. I learned more from watching him across a room than I did from sitting down and trying to study anybody. So 5 is not an easy selection. And I know tomorrow I'll think of someone else and say, Christ, I should have said that. But these 5, yeah, these are guys I kept coming back to, man. Little Richard was something. As a kid, I recall hearing those records and thinking, what the hell is going on here? There wasn't any waiting around with him, no delicate introduction, no warming you up. The thing would start and soon he was right there shouting the piano, screaming like mad. Everybody pushing at once. It sounded risky. That's probably what I loved about it. People talk about rock and roll now as though somebody sat down and invented a formula for it, but when you listen to those early Little Richard records, there doesn't seem to be much of a formula. It sounds like somebody opened the door and let the whole bloody room loose. And he had that voice, you couldn't ignore him. I was always attracted to musicians like that. People you could recognize very immediately. You didn't need somebody to inform you who was playing. A few seconds came out of the speaker and you knew. Little Richard had that. And he realized something else that important to me later on. Rock and roll isn't supposed to stand still. You have to give something to the people. You have to go out there and make the room move. When we started performing with AC/DC, we weren't thinking about putting on some great theatrical show. We were playing pubs and small clubs. Half the time you were trying to get the attention of people who were drinking, talking, shouting at their mates. You learned quickly. If you went out there looking scared, they'd devour you alive. So you moved, you played, you gave it everything. Some of that mindset, I guess, had been placed in my head years ago by folks like Little Richard. He wasn't standing there requesting permission. He came through the speakers as if he owned the space. Even now when I hear those old recordings, they seem anything but nice. They don't sound old, either. They still got that kick. And that's the thing, isn't it? You can have all the gear in the world, all the clever tricks, all the technique, but if the music doesn't make you want to jump out of your chair, what's the bloody point? Muddy Waters was another story. With Little Richard, everything was hurled at you. Muddy could just sit there and play a few notes and somehow that was enough. That was badass. I do it still. There was something about those old blues records. They weren't sanitary. You could hear the room in them. You could hear the fingers on strings. Sometimes the guitar sounded almost like it was arguing with the voice. As a kid, I didn't understand any of that, of course. I just knew it sounded good. Later, when I started playing more seriously, I began to realize how difficult that simplicity actually was. Anybody can make a lot of noise. Believe me, I've spent most of my life doing it. But playing one note and making somebody listen, that's harder. Muddy could do that. There'd be a little bend, a pause, maybe another note, and suddenly the whole song had a mood to it. He never sounded as though he was trying to prove anything. That's probably one of the biggest lessons I got from the blues. You don't have to fill every empty space. Sometimes the empty space is the best bit. I've had old Muddy Waters recordings around for years. I'd take them with me, put them on in the car, listen to the same songs I'd already heard hundreds of times. People sometimes question, don't you get weary of it? No. If something's good, why would you? Malcolm was the same way about certain records. We go back to the old stuff because there was something honest in it. No fuss, no great production trick, hiding what was underneath. Just a fella playing. And when you're young, you tend to think you need more value, more notes, more everything. Then you get older and start realizing the great players often knew what to leave out. Muddy certainly did. I don't think I ever wanted to sound exactly like him. I couldn't have anyway. But that feeling he had, that economy. Yeah. I wanted some of that shit. With the AC/DC underneath all the volume and the Marshall stacks, there's a lot of blues there. It never really went away. And Muddy Waters was one of the reasons why. The first time I heard Riffs, I think, was Purple Haze. And I remember thinking, what the hell is he doing? 'Cause it didn't sound like the guitar players I'd been listening to with Chuck Bry or the old blues fellas. You could sort of hear where things came from. Even when you couldn't play it yourself, there was something familiar about it. Riffs was different. He sounded like he'd found another door somewhere. Suddenly, the guitar was making all these noises, feedback bends, strange little sounds coming from everywhere. But the thing people sometimes forget is that underneath all of that, the fella could really play. He had the blues in him. That's what I heard. People got caught up in the clothes and the guitar behind his head in setting the bloody thing on fire. Fair enough. You weren't going to forget seeing him. But listen to him properly. There was plenty going on underneath. I never looked at Riffs and thought, right, I'm going to do that. You couldn't. That would have been ridiculous. He had his thing and I had to find mine. But seeing somebody take an instrument that everybody thought they understood and push it somewhere completely different, that stays with you, it makes you realize there aren't really many rules. When you're young, that's a useful thing to discover. I was never interested in becoming one of those players who stands there looking terribly serious while playing a million notes. I wanted the guitar to be part of the whole performance. If I felt like running across the stage, I'd run. If I ended up on the floor, well, I ended up on the floor. Riffs had that freedom. Nothing looked carefully measured. It felt as though the music had taken over and he was simply hanging on to it. I liked that very much. And there was another thing about him. You always knew it was Riffs. One note, sometimes that's all you needed. I've always thought that's one of the hardest things for any musician to find. Not speed, not technique, a voice, something that belongs to you. And Riffs had one from the moment you heard him. And after he came along, guitar playing wasn't quite the same anymore. Chuck Bry was probably the fellow I went back to more than anybody. You could put one of his records on and I'd be happy sitting there listening to the whole thing. I didn't need to skip around looking for the guitar bits. The songs were good. That's vital. Sometimes guitar players forget there's supposed to be a song occurring while they're busy showing you what they can do. Chuck never seemed to forget that. His instrument would come in, say exactly what it needed to say, and then get out of the way. And that sound. You knew it straight immediately. I used to sit there trying to puzzle out those small guitar parts. Sometimes I'd think I'd got one, then I'd listen again and realize, no, that's not it at all. There was always some small twist in there. People see me doing the duck walk and immediately think of Chuck. Well, of course. Everybody knows where that comes from. I never tried to claim I'd invented the bloody thing. I saw something I loved and believed it belonged in rock and roll. Simple as that. But what I enjoyed most was not the dockwastrol. It was the beat. A Chuck could make a guitar jump. That's the only way I can describe it. You hear those old records and your foot is tapping before you even know it. Malcolm knew that better than anyone. He constantly cared about the groove under things. And Chuck Bry was one of those folks who proved how potent that could be. Sometimes we talk about certain records, but not in any serious music debate, you know. Malcolm could point at something and say, "Listen to this." Then we play it again. That was as technical as we ever got. Chuck made rock and roll sound easy. That is usually what happens when somebody is exceptionally talented at anything. You think I could run that? Then you take up the guitar and you realize you can't. No, not quite. I've been performing some of those ideas for most of my life and I still hear things in Chuck's songs that make me grin. A little phrase, a little time, one of those openings when the guitar comes crashing through the door before you've even got yourself seated in your chair. That's rock and roll in my book. Has always been. And Chuck Berry had it before most of us knew what we were looking for. Well, Malcolm, that's a different one for me because, he wasn't somebody that I found on the record. He was my brother. He's in the home. I was still trying to figure out what I was doing with the guitar and he was there. And, well, Malcolm can be a tough bugger. He'd inform you if something was wrong. There was no, "Oh, that's quite good, Angus." You'd look at him and say, "Do it again." So you did it again. People often spoke about me because I was the one running around the school in a boy suit. Malcolm didn't give a damn for any of that. He'd be in the background with that Gretsch, holding the entire bloody thing together. I could run anywhere knowing that Malcolm was there. That's one thing folks don't always get about AC/DC. He had given me the freedom to be Angus. He played rhythm guitar in a style that looked almost too basic. Then try standing next to him and performing it yourself. Good luck. His timing was spooky. He knew when to pull a heartstring, but more crucially, he understood when not to. There was room in how Malcolm played. Everything had to breathe. And sometimes we'd be working on a riff and I'd start adding bits to it. "You don't need that," Malcolm would say. And I would say, "How about this?" "No." "How about that?" "No." He was usually correct. It sucks when it's your older brother. But he knew songs. He knew the band. He could hear when something wasn't working before the rest of us had even worked out what was wrong. And he never needed anyone to tell him how good he was. That was not Malcolm. He wanted the band to be good. That was what mattered. Until he could remain no longer. That was hard. You'd walk into a room and there'd be a place where you'd spent most of your life expecting him to be. I still think of him every time I play the game. Sometimes I'll be doing something and I can nearly hear him. "Don't fool about with it. I'll get it done. Keep it movin'." That's Malcolm. I have appreciated several musicians in my life. I've heard guitar players that could achieve things I would never think of. But if you ask me who taught me the most about what it's like to be in a rock and roll band, it was a guy standing next to me all those years. My brother Malcolm. When you become older, it's funny. People want you to go back and explain it all. Where it all came from, who inspired what record altered your life. I don't suppose we thought about it that way when we were kids. We have just heard. Little Richard made you want to boogie. Muddy Waters taught you how much you could express without playing very much at all. Rise made the guitar seem like it had no bounds. Brutal. Chuck Berry gave rock and roll that swing that everybody's been pursuing ever since. And Malcolm was there. That is the difference. I didn't have to put on a record to hear him. I just had to walk into the room. And for years I glance across the stage and see him standing there. Same kind of pose, Gretsch leaning on him, witnessing it all. You get used to things like that. You think that they are always going to be there. And then one day they're not. But the funny thing about music is that people never leave altogether. Play an old record and they're back in a flash. Chuck is back again. Muddy's back. Little Richard is shouting again. Crix makes that guitar sound like nothing else on the planet. And yeah, when I hear those classic AC/DC tracks, I hear Malcolm, not the guitar. I hear him. That's probably why I still enjoy old records so much. They are little chunks of time someone managed to save.